5 boys left the football field with victory in hand and vanished from the world like they never existed. In 2001, the Dorsey Wolves high school team made history, a nail-biting playoff win that shook the entire town. Fans screamed, camera flashes lit up the night, and the coach embraced his players like a father hugging his sons. It was one of those moments everyone thought they'd remember forever for the joy, but it turned out they'd remember it for a completely different reason. By 9 p.m., the boys climbed into an old van heading home just 80 miles away. But none of them ever made it back. No crash, no tire tracks, no distress call. They vanished off the map, like they were never there. The news flared up for a few days, then faded. But for the town of Dorsey, and especially one mother, the nightmare lasted 22 years. The question never went away. Where did they go, and who took them from this world, until one October afternoon? A young boy out on a camping trip stumbled over a rusted sheet of metal buried beneath thick moss. At first, he thought it was just part of an old fence, but when he saw the door handle, everything began to change. The town of Dorsey sits tucked deep in the pine forests of Alabama, where Google Maps is a luxury and cell signal is as faint as church bells on a rainy day. There's no mall, no radio station, just one gas station, one barbershop, and a high school football field where time seems to stop every Friday evening. Here, basketball isn't just a sport, it's a belief. It's what makes folks forget unpaid bills, unresolved arguments, and come together on rickety wooden bleachers to cheer on kids who carry their dreams of getting out. The Dorsey Wolves were once the worst team in the district 19 years without a single regional win. That was until Milton Hayes showed up. Hayes was a tall black man with graying hair, always in a short-sleeve button-up and a worn-out ball cap. He was a former Marine discharged after a knee injury who came back to Dorsey to teach PE. Nobody thought he'd change the team, but he did what few dared, to dream he turned a bunch of regular teens into a regional phenomenon. He didn't yell. He coached with silence, with a steady gaze and a hand on the shoulder. He knew every parent's name, every family situation, every silent fear each player carried. To him, the team wasn't about winning, it was about giving each kid a place to belong. To those boys, he wasn't just a coach. He was a second father, the one who called home when someone acted up, the one quietly filling out scholarship forms for those with potential. His garage lights stayed on every Saturday night, ready for the boys to come over play NBA 2K on an old console and eat leftover pizza. That was the soul of Dorsey, not flashy, not full of big dreams. Just a small place with people trying to hold on to the last good things. Jamal Reed was the team's unofficial leader. He played point guard, not the tallest or strongest, but with an incredible ability to read the game and a calm that many adults would envy. He grew up in a 2-bedroom house at the end of Sycamore Street, where his mother Loretta was a nurse, a cook, a therapist, and the #1 fan, all in one. Jamal had a simple dream to become a doctor. In a school interview, he once said, "I want to be the one standing when no one else can." His room held an odd pairing, a human anatomy poster, next to a photo of Michael Jordan. Under his pillow, he kept a notebook filled with scouting notes on opposing players. Andre Bennett played center. He stood 6'5", shoulders as wide as a garage frame, and was always the first to show up for practice, even when it wasn't required. Andre lived with his grandmother. His mother died of cancer when he was 10, and his father was never in the picture. People said Andre had a temper. He'd been suspended once for fighting, but ask his best friend Kevin, and he'd say Andre doesn't fight out of anger. He fights when someone messes with people he loves. One time, after seeing a classmate get teased for wearing a torn shirt, Andre showed up the next day with 3 clean ones, said nothing, just left them on the desk. Tyrone Fisher was the smallest on the team, even shorter than Jamal, but quick as lightning. He played shooting guard and was always the first to fall back on defense. Tyrone lived in his own world, always wearing headphones, even when they weren't playing music. He avoided eye contact, kept to himself, and scribbled cryptic thoughts on his hands. His father, a firefighter, died in a blaze in 1997. Since then, he lived with his mother and older sister, growing quiet and withdrawn. Basketball was the only place where Tyrone exploded with energy, like every bit of him that was bottled up came pouring out with each pass, each steal. Coach Hayes once said, "Tyrone doesn't need to be understood. He just needs a ball and someone to believe in him." 3 boys, 3 lives, 3 reasons to take the court, but one thing in common together: they were unbreakable. Kevin Dunn was the Joker, the comic heartbeat that cut through tense moments. Tall, skinny, with runner's legs, but his real strength was his smile. He could make the whole team laugh after a loss could soften Coach Hayes with one perfectly timed joke. But behind the laughs was a complicated story. Kevin's dad was arrested for arms trafficking when Kevin was 9. His mom left without a word. He lived with his cousin and often cooked his own dinners. Kevin learned how to survive, how to make people like him, as a kind of self-defense. Basketball to Kevin was the one place he felt truly valuable. Out on the court when he made a pass, no one saw coming and heard the crowd cheer. That was the only time he felt like he belonged. Lamont Price was the only teammate who shared a last name with Jamal. They were cousins. But outside of blood, they were opposites. Lamont was stubborn, quick to argue, and never took criticism lightly. He once skipped practice over feeling left out, once fought with Andre over a rebound. But Lamont was also the first to charge in when someone pulled a plastic knife on Jamal in the cafeteria. He wasn't perfect, but he was fiercely loyal. His mother, Loretta's younger sister, moved in with Jamal's family after a divorce. The boys grew up like brothers, shared a room, biked to school together. Despite their clashes, Jamal was the one person Lamont always listened to. The strange thing was, when they were together, they were different. On the court, it wasn't Lamont or Kevin, it was just the Wolves. They spoke in glances, understood each other without words. In Dorsey, they were called the 5 Fingers, each one with its own personality, all moving toward the same goal. Coach Hayes used to say, "Y'all don't have to be the same. You just have to trust each other." On chilly March nights, when the mist rolled in over the school field, folks could still see those 5 boys out there shooting hoops under the dim yellow lights. Sometimes, Loretta would stand in the distance and watch, never knowing it would be the last time, because just days later they would climb into that old blue van and never come back. It was a cold March night, just after the Wolves' dramatic victory. The game ended at 9:20 p.m. In the bleachers, fans lingered, and the field echoed with the final footsteps of the players. The van, a faded blue Ford Econoline, 15 seats, with a sliding door that needed both hands to pry open, was already parked behind the gym. Coach Hayes was behind the wheel. The 5 boys, exhausted but elated, climbed in one by one. The stadium's security camera captured the moment, 9:46 p.m. The door closed. Brake lights flared. The van pulled out and turned left onto Highway 63, heading back to Dorsey. That was the last time anyone saw them. That night, Loretta waited in the living room, toast ready on the table, orange juice in the fridge. 11 o'clock passed, then 1 a.m., then 3. No messages, no calls, no sound from the door. The next morning, a police cruiser sat quietly outside. Officers asked Loretta if Jamal might have stayed at a friend's house. Then, if Coach Hayes had said anything strange recently. Every question felt like they were trying to piece together a picture that didn't exist. Loretta knew something was wrong. Very wrong. The county police launched an investigation. Roads around Woodlawn were searched. Fields, embankments, lakes, all combed through. But there were no signs of an accident, no broken glass, no skid marks, not a single piece of evidence the van had ever left the highway. The media picked up the story fast. 5 high school players vanish without a trace. Coach hero or fugitive. The headlines screamed, drowning out the quiet heartbreak of those left behind. The Dorsey community held prayer circles, plastered the town with photos of the missing boys. But after a week with no updates, the spotlight faded. The case was labeled missing under unknown circumstances. But Loretta and a few other parents refused to accept that. To them, these boys didn't just disappear. "Jamal would never go anywhere without texting me," she said. "If he's silent, it's because he can't speak." The official search began 3 days after the van vanished. County police joined forces with volunteers from Dorsey and nearby towns. They used drones tracking dogs, even metal detectors looking for any sign, a shoe, a tire mark, a scrap of paint. Every effort led nowhere. A local truck driver, Arthur Malone, reported seeing strange lights in the woods between Highway 63 and Route 184, around 10 p.m., the time the van would have been en route. He remembered clearly because he'd stopped to check a tire. But when officers checked the area, they found nothing but soggy ground and dead trees. The families, especially Loretta and Andres' grandmother, began printing flyers holding candlelight vigils, begging the media to return. A reporter named Clarissa Reed from the Birmingham Daily agreed to write a long-form series on the case. She was the first to ask a key question. Why wasn't the van caught on any traffic cameras? A strange detail emerged after leaving the stadium. The van was never picked up on a single traffic cam. A 5-meter-long vehicle driving a main road late at night, and not one image. Police claimed it might have taken a side road or a camera may have malfunctioned, but to Loretta, it sounded like a weak excuse. Jamal always comes home on time. If he took a different road, someone made him do it. Then came another chilling fact. Lamont's phone pinged its final signal near the Pinewood Lake cell tower, a body of water nearly 12 miles off the main route. This data point had been missed in the first 2 days due to a clerical error. Clarissa published the detail. Public interest surged again. Divers were sent to Lake Pinewood. They searched for 3 straight days using sonar to sweep the bottom, but the lake bed was muddy and deep. Visibility was near zero. Nothing turned up. The town of Dorsey began to divide. Some believed it was a tragic accident. Others suspected someone was behind it. But the biggest fear, the one no one dared to say aloud, was this. If there was no accident and no proof what really happened in those 80 miles 22 years past. Every year, Loretta held a private vigil in her backyard. A small altar with 5 candles, 1 for each boy, and faded photos wiped clean of dust every week. She never moved, never changed her number. Jamal's room remained untouched since the night he left basketball shoes by the bed, medical books on the shelf, a good luck card still taped to the mirror. In 2012, an independent podcast team reopened the case, revisiting the original files. They pointed out a 27-minute dead zone in the phone tower data near Lake Pinewood, a time period no official report ever mentioned. That brought Clarissa back. Now a seasoned journalist, she teamed up with the podcasters to dig deeper. They filed for public records and found this Coach Hayes phone's last ping wasn't near the lake. It was nearly 40 miles north, near a long-abandoned military warehouse. The site had once stored transport equipment in the 1970s, but was shut down in 1995. No one had ever mentioned this in any report. Clarissa and the podcast team went there. Amid chest-high weeds, they found broken no trespassing signs and a rusted iron gate, sealed with chains. No one had the key. But through a gap, they saw not hard evidence, but something that sent chills down their spines, a faded red basketball sitting alone on cracked concrete. Clarissa snapped a photo and sent it to Loretta. She didn't reply immediately, but 3 days later, she arrived at the warehouse. She walked straight to the ball, picked it up. Beneath the dirt, she saw 3 faded letters, written in marker, JRM, Jamal Reed Milton, his full name. A name only she ever used. There's still no legal proof strong enough to reopen the case. But from that moment on for Loretta, this was just a disappearance. It was a cover-up. And the question was no longer, what happened? It was, who made it happen? When the podcast team released their findings about the old warehouse, a new wave of public attention surged. But with it came uncomfortable questions about the people who had once been witnesses, who had been involved, who had been overlooked. And then stories started to surface, though they didn't quite line up. A former police officer from the original 2001 investigation, speaking anonymously to Clarissa, revealed that on the night of the disappearance, they received an anonymous call at 10:15 p.m. The caller reported seeing a blue van turning down an unusual road about 5 miles off the main route. But the recording of that call was no longer in the official case files. The officer insisted we were ordered to focus on the accident theory. No one wanted to investigate this as a crime. A former classmate of Kevin recalled that Kevin once mentioned feeling like someone was watching after late practices. He even sketched the license plate of a silver pickup truck that had been parked near the stadium more than once. That lead was never officially pursued. Clarissa visited Andres' grandmother. She remembered once Andre whispered to me that Coach Hayes had received an anonymous letter. It said if he didn't stop pushing the team to go far, someone would make sure they never went anywhere again. At the time, she thought it was just a threat from a sore loser. Now, she wasn't so sure. These scattered details, seemingly trivial, began forming a chaotic yet compelling picture. Was someone watching them? Were there real threats? Or was this all just memory warped by 20 years of grief? One of the most frustrating elements for Clarissa remained the traffic cameras, or the lack thereof. None captured any images of the van after 9:50 p.m. that night. Police had once explained it away as a simultaneous system failure. But the podcast team pointed out there were no repair records, no service tickets logged at that time. So were the cameras really down, or had someone shut them off? An anonymous telecom technician confirmed that back in March 2001, those traffic cameras were under contract with a private maintenance company, a company that went bankrupt just months after the disappearance. A connection that raised eyebrows, if not outright alarms. Then Clarissa received an anonymous call, a deep, hoarse male voice. He said only one sentence. Find the man with the leather watch strap sitting in the back row of the stadium that night. Then the line went dead. After days combing through old footage, Clarissa found a grainy VHS clip filmed by a parent. In the blurry frame back row, there was indeed a tall white man in a black jacket and baseball cap, eyes down on his phone. Strangely, he didn't clap, didn't cheer, and left before the final buzzer. Clarissa took a still from the footage and posted it to an online identification form. Someone responded they recognized the man as a former contractor at a decommissioned military storage site in a neighboring county, the same general area where Coach Hayes' final phone ping had originated. No one knew his name. No official records linked him to the game. But it was clear on a night of celebration for the town, someone had shown up not to cheer, but to watch. The story's perspective began to shift this time, not through Clarissa, but from someone entirely new, Elijah Brooks. Elijah was a homeless man who had once lived near the abandoned warehouse. He had been arrested a few times for trespassing and minor drug charges, so his testimony had always been dismissed. But when Clarissa tracked him down, he shared something no one had ever heard. That night, I was sleeping under a tin awning near the western fence, Elijah said. I heard a vehicle pull in, then a door slide open heavy like a van door. People were arguing, then silence. A little while later, I heard another engine, not the van, something big, like a diesel truck. Clarissa asked, "Did you see anyone?" Elijah shook his head, didn't dare poke my head out. But next morning, I saw fresh tire tracks deeper than a van, big, and something else on the grass, a pale red stain. Not blood, more like paint. Clarissa cross-checked this account with satellite maps. Sure enough, there was a dirt road behind the warehouse, one that led to a service exit onto the back highway. A perfect route to disappear unnoticed. So what if the van had made it there and been transferred to a different vehicle? Elijah's story couldn't be verified completely. But one detail stood out. He described the stuck sliding door, a detail never made public. So, who told him that? Or did he really witness it? Now the question is no longer who vanished, but who was once ignored, left on the margins, and is now speaking the truth that should have been heard 22 years ago. When traditional leads dried up, the podcast team decided to take a daring step, tapping into commercial satellite imagery from 2001. This data belonged to a private remote sensing company, primarily used for agricultural mapping and environmental monitoring. Typically, such data was stored for just 3 months. But Marcus, a former signal analyst and the team's lead technician, had a connection, a professor at Missouri State University who had once worked on a project preserving old satellite images for urban history research. Through this professor, they were granted temporary access to a raw archive, a massive trove of unprocessed satellite data, tens of thousands of images from multiple satellites taken minutes apart but at very low resolution. After weeks of combing through it, they found a sequence of images taken between 10:15 and 10:35 p.m. the night the team vanished. In one frame, captured at 10:32 p.m., behind the abandoned warehouse where Coach Hayes' phone had last pinged, 2 unusual shapes appeared. One, a white rectangle about 6 meters long, strongly resembling a box truck. Next to it, a darker shape, shorter, roughly the size of the 15-passenger Ford Econoline van the team had used. The image quality made it impossible to confirm a license plate, but the timing and location were eerily aligned. Marcus sent the images to a satellite imagery expert at Princeton. The preliminary analysis suggested the darker shape showed signs of minor rear-end damage, possibly from being pushed or towed. That raised a new theory. Could the van have been stopped, forcibly removed from the highway, and transferred to another vehicle? Clarissa presented the finding to state police. The response was just as cold as it had been 22 years earlier, insufficient reliability to reopen the case. Undeterred, Clarissa pivoted. She began digging through employment records tied to the warehouse and its contractors between 1999 and 2001. Most of it was a blur until one name stood out: Raymond Slater, a maintenance engineer who had worked during the final phase of the site's closure. One by one, scattered pieces began to form a much darker picture. But no one expected that just the name Raymond Slater would make every previous theory seem fragile. Slater's name had never appeared in any 2001 investigation report, but archived files from the Federal Department of Military Industry showed he'd been assigned to the warehouse near Lake Pinewood, the same area where Coach Hayes' phone last pinged from 1997 to mid-2001. He left the job shortly after the disappearance, citing mental health instability due to wartime trauma. Clarissa found Slater's former address in Greenville County, about 80 miles from Dorsey. The house was vacant, but neighbors remembered him well. Kept to himself, not friendly, one said. But what was weird was he used to show up at high school basketball games in small towns even though he didn't have kids. When asked about March 14, 2001, no one remembered anything except for a woman named Sharon who had worked at a grocery store near Slater's home. She recalled him buying a gas can and a few sandwiches around 7 p.m. "I remember because it was my son's birthday. He didn't say a word, just paid and left. But I remember the boots, old army boots, muddy and heavy." Marcus checked another source maintenance budget records from the warehouse before it shut down. One odd entry jumped out: $450 for industrial paint supplies and containers dated March 12th. The requisition was approved by Raymond Slater. Clarissa eventually located Slater's only son, now living in Louisiana. He refused to speak at first, but weeks later he left a voicemail. "I don't know what happened, but my father had a wall covered in maps and photos of those 5 boys marked in red ink. I saw it when I was cleaning out his house. He burned it." Slater died of lung cancer in 2019. No will, no record of whether he was ever questioned. No known reason why he would have been at the game that night. But what's clear now, a man no one remembered with no known ties to the team had been at the final phone signal site and had once covered his wall with photos of the missing boys was no longer a coincidence. And what haunted Clarissa most in that blurry VHS footage from the game, among hundreds of cheering fans, there sat one man who didn't clap, didn't smile. He just watched, eyes fixed on the 5 boys like he was marking targets. Clarissa tried to file a formal request with the State Bureau of Investigation to review internal files related to Slater. The response: no such records exist. A former employee revealed that many files were deleted in a 2005 system error, or at least that was the official explanation. Clarissa began to wonder, had someone tried to erase Slater's trail? The deeper she dug, the more inconsistencies surfaced. Why wasn't Slater ever questioned? Why would someone with unstable behavior, who ordered industrial materials days before the disappearance, be left entirely off the radar? And if he was innocent, why burn the photos? When the victims' families were told Slater's name, reactions varied. Andres' grandmother fell silent, then broke into tears. "I saw that man. He was standing by the road after the game near the van. I thought he was someone's relative." I didn't know. Her words chilled Clarissa to the bone. If true, then Raymond Slater had been right there by the van moments before it vanished, not by chance, not as a theory, as an unspoken truth. But even with all these threads forming a compelling case, police still refused to reopen it. No direct evidence, they insisted. No one left to question. Clarissa didn't stop, but now what she faced wasn't just a mystery, it was a wall of silence, fear, and people who didn't want the truth unearthed. And that's when she began asking the biggest question of all: if a man like Slater could hide in the shadows for 22 years, how many other truths are buried beneath the dust of everything we chose to forget? Clarissa decided to start from scratch, not with old investigation files, but through storytelling. She rebuilt the entire timeline of that night, using an interactive map, the starting point, the route where the cameras failed the satellite evidence, and the location of the warehouse. When everything connected, one detail startled her: a blind spot, no cameras, no witnesses, no official mention. A curve leading down to a patch of land by the lake, absent from any public maps. She and Marcus went there. The area was overgrown, abandoned, but remnants remained: a faded sign, auxiliary supply zone, no entry. Beneath the soil, they found shards of glass and a melted piece of plastic, as if something had once exploded. Not enough to prove anything, but just enough to say something happened here. At the same time, the podcast received an anonymous email. Attached was an audio recording, a man's voice whispering, "It wasn't just Slater. There was someone else. He was just the tool." The recording cut off midway, but the audio quality was clean. A forensic sound analyst confirmed it had not been altered. Clarissa began to question everything. If Slater didn't act alone, who else was involved? Why were all the related files gone? And why, after 22 years, had no one in law enforcement ever spoken out? It was no longer a missing persons case. It was starting to look like a system designed to make 5 boys disappear without a trace, without accountability, and without anyone willing to see it through. Clarissa and Marcus began retracing what remained incomplete clues, forgotten testimonies. They found a former administrative employee named Darnell, who'd worked at the Dorsey County Sheriff's Office from 2000 to 2003. At first, he hesitated, but when Clarissa mentioned the missing boys, his expression changed. "I remember the day after someone from the state showed up. They spent over 3 hours in the archives, then left with several boxes. Nobody was allowed in. I never saw those records again." Clarissa asked for a name. He shook his head. They wore plain clothes, no badges, but someone in the office called them federal. Why would people identifying as federal agents remove files from an unclassified missing persons case? And if it was the FBI, why was there no official record? This was no longer speculation. This was intervention, systematic, intentional, and possibly premeditated. Clarissa felt disoriented. In the hundreds of hours of recordings, interviews, maps, and documents, nothing felt certain anymore. Even the first witness, Loretta Jamal's mother, began to doubt her own memory. "I used to believe Jamal sent me a text at 9:43. But now I'm not sure. I've read it so many times. Maybe I just wanted to believe it was real." That broke Clarissa. If even the emotional cornerstone of the case, that final message, was uncertain, then what was left to believe? While rewatching interview footage, Marcus noticed an overlooked audio anomaly, a faint burst of static, similar to a fax machine or an encoded signal. They sent it to a senior audio engineer who identified it as an old military radio transmission code typically used in vehicle tracking devices. If the van had been tagged, there were only 2 possibilities. Either someone wanted to protect the team, or they wanted to know exactly when it went off course. Clarissa broke down when she heard that. Not from fear, but because for the first time in 22 years, she no longer knew what she was investigating. A disappearance, an organized abduction, or a hidden social experiment. The podcast audience started reacting too. People who had once stayed silent began sending emails, handwritten letters, even journals. Someone recalled hearing helicopters that night. Another remembered a large truck leaving the area with its lights off. Small details, not enough to stand alone, but together they formed a rising undercurrent. No one believed in a single story anymore. Everyone held a fragment. And the truth, perhaps, was never meant to be whole. Just a collection of broken pieces floating between darkness and hope, waiting for someone brave enough to put them back together. Clarissa decided to hold a community gathering at the old high school, the place that had once echoed with laughter cheers, and was the last place all 5 boys were seen together. Word spread quickly. The townspeople came in droves, bringing flowers, candles, faded photographs, and questions that still had no answers. Loretta sat in the front row, clutching the last handwritten letter from Jamal. Clarissa stepped onto the small stage, not to reveal the truth, but to share the journey. She spoke of Slater, of the clues forgotten, of the untraced truck, and of the files taken with no explanation. But then she paused. "After 22 years, I've come to realize maybe we'll never get a full answer, but that doesn't mean we stop searching, because silence is what made them disappear. A middle-aged black woman broke into tears. A young man raised a photograph of the 2001 basketball team with the words scrawled across it, "They deserve to be remembered." The room felt heavy but powerful, filled with the strength of memory and a community refusing to forget. Clarissa's podcast became a phenomenon, not because it solved the case, but because it showed the power of asking the power of refusing to accept silence as an answer. As the gathering came to a close, a little girl walked to the stage. She placed a single white daisy on the floor and said, "I don't know who they were, but if I ever disappeared, I hope someone would do what you did, Ms. Clarissa." No one said a word, but everyone understood. The truth may be hidden, but memory, when spoken aloud, can live forever. And in the quiet night behind the school auditorium, Clarissa stood still. She knew this journey wasn't over, but she also knew it was the light of the community of those who never gave up that could guide the way through even the longest dark. Some stories don't need answers, only to be told with care and persistence. Like a small flame in a storm, its victory is simply in not going out. If you've ever been lost in the dark, you'll understand it's not the brightest light that leads you home. It's the one that never quits. This story doesn't end. It's a whisper that keeps going in memory and restless dreams and in the hearts of those still listening. No one disappears if someone still remembers.